Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'd really like to show you 7 techniques that I have learned to finish your raw seams, raw edges without a serger or an overlocker, as we call it here in Australia. When I started sewing, I felt really amateurish for not having a serger, and I thought, oh, it's something that I'm going to have to eventually invest in. But perhaps not. I will say I work a lot with woven fabrics, but if you're working a lot with a knit, you may prefer a serger. Or if your items are going to be for sale, you may prefer the finish of a serger. Here I have 7 really good, really easy techniques to very neatly finish your seams without the need for a serger or an overlocker. Without any further ado, 7 techniques to finish your raw seams.
For method 1, I'm using bias binding or bias tape. Now you want to make sure you have quite a bit of it, especially if it's a large project that you're working on. You want your machine on the middle zigzag stitch, and basically you want to encase your raw edge within the bias binding simply by folding the bias binding over the raw edge once, and then hold that taut and lock it under your presser foot. Lock it down and sew your zigzag stitch right over the bias binding, making sure that it's evenly distributed on both sides of the fabric. Snip it off at the end and there's your bias edge. Then, because on woven fabrics the zigzag stitch can be a bit loose, I like to run a straight stitch just all the way up alongside the zigzag on the fabric to further secure things. Method 2, very similar. I'm using lace for binding. If you have some lace just hanging around waiting for a project, this can be a really nice way to finish your edges with a really pretty touch. So my machine's on zigzag again, and I'm just going to encase the raw edge with the lace and pin it down, and then I'm going to start sewing. And I'm going to do the same that I did on the bias binding, where I zigzag and then do a straight stitch to reinforce. It almost is like a serger effect, which we'll talk about more later. Now my black thread is just for show, but you should end up with something like this. Okay, now for this fake serger method. So with this method you can actually do a sort of impression overlock on your regular sewing machine. So you want to get your raw edge and put your needle down just over the edge of your fabric, and we're on zigzag stitch again, and start sewing, and you want your needle to always land just over the edge of the fabric on the right side. You should end up with something like this. And once again, to further reinforce it, I will be doing a straight stitch which hits on the left side of the zigzag. And since I did the straight stitch, you can see that it's very secure. This method is just pinked edges using pinking shears, which are special dressmaking shears that have a zigzag serrated edge. So for this method I'm sewing a 1.5 centimeter seam. Then, I'm sorry it wasn't pictured, but I just trim the very edge of the raw seam off with the pinking shears, and now I'm going to iron the seam flat. Now, pinked edges are a very historical method. I believe it was still used up until the 1950s, very commonly. I have a real soft spot for pinked edges, but it's not always the strongest method and requires hand washing. This one's my secret method that I just brainstormed the other day. I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with this though. So you'll see with pinked edges, they can fray a bit. They don't completely fray out, but this is a great way to secure them. Using iron-on interfacing. So what I do is I just cut 2 centimeter strips of iron-on interfacing. I place them over the pinked seams and I iron them on. And you can see that this is a very strong result. You can actually see the zigzag edge encased in there very securely. This method requires a bit of hand sewing, so just be aware of that. I'm not good at hand sewing at all. I'm actually really embarrassed to show my stitches.